highlights of the Jewish year is the Pesach Seder. The Seder when you get together and the families are often, it's a reunion for many families. And the families get together and you have all the preparation after the cleaning and all that went into getting ready for this major event on the Jewish calendar. And when we start the Seder, everybody knows the beginning of the Kaddish, everybody makes Kiddush, and you have a cup of wine, you get grape juice if you prefer, then urchatz, if people wash their hands, you have to remember not to make a bracha. Then we get the karpas. And karpas is whatever you prefer it to be, whether it's a bite of celery or carrots or potatoes. Different people have different choices for their karpas. We dip it in salt water. And we eat this karpas, we take a bite of the karpas, and you have to eat less than a kazais, which is about 30 grams. It's not much, and usually when a person eats the karpas, it becomes a reminder that they really are pretty hungry. Celery has never tasted so good as when you have, when it's about the first thing you've eaten in 6 hours, and you have to take 2 bites. But then you eat this karpas. Now the karpas officially, that we dip into the karpas, so we wash our hands before the karpas, because the karpas is an appetizer. And it's an appetizer where normally appetizers are eaten right before the food. That's why it's called an appetizer, because it's to arouse the appetite. Now what happens with the karpas is something very puzzling. So we take a bite of this karpas, and then the Seder, we go through a few other, break the afikomen, and we begin magid, and the ritual, the entire Seder takes place. Now that begs the question, why are we eating an appetizer where the main course doesn't take place? In some homes it may not take place an hour and a half until an hour and a half or 2 hours later. And it's a very funny type of appetizer that also we're going to eat something, and then they're not going to eat, and we're going to take the appetizer, and then you're going to just wait until you're really, really hungry before getting to the food. So what's really going on? What is the secret of this karpas? So we know that the Jewish people were in Egypt, and the Jewish people were being enslaved, and we have the moror, which commemorates the bitter exile. But ironically, the moror is romaine lettuce, which is not all that bitter. And the commentaries explain, well, it's kind of sweet, but got a bitter aftertaste, what we call bittersweet. Some people like bittersweet chocolate, some people like milk chocolate. You have over here bittersweet, a bittersweet exile. Bittersweet is because it started out, they drew the Jewish people into the slavery. The Egyptians conned them into being slaves. They thought they were going to get paid for it, and eventually they were poured into hard, crushing labor. That's the story of the Seder. So now we're celebrating. We start with this appetizer. And this appetizer now there's followed by a major gap until we get to the food. What is the secret of this karpas? So there's an interesting statement that the Talmud makes that the Jewish people, when they were in Egypt, on the one hand, the loyalty to Judaism was very, very strong. They did not change their clothing. They did not change their name. They changed their clothing. I mean, they probably did laundry, but they didn't change the style of their clothing. They didn't change their names. They maintained Jewish names, and they did not change their language. Whatever the spoken Jewish language was at the time, I'm sure they probably had their form of Yiddish, even though it probably wasn't Yiddish as we know it today. But they had a very Jewish language, Lashon HaKodesh, and they may have had some sort of Yiddishized form of Lashon HaKodesh. Be that as it may, that was a tremendous display of Jewish loyalty, because here they were 210 years in Egypt, and in 210 years they maintained a very, very strong Jewish identity. On the other hand, the Talmud says that they were on a 49th level of ritual impurity. Now that's very difficult to understand. How could somebody who is so Jewish become ritually impure? How could you end up on the 49th level if there's such a strong bond and a strong loyalty to Judaism? In the United States, when people came over after the Second World War, so people already threw their tefillin over the boats and changed their clothing and adopted American non-Jewish names within a generation or two, not much more. And here they were 210 years, and they maintained this very strong loyalty. So how is it that they could be both on the one hand considered loyal to Judaism, on the other on the 49th level of impurity, such that had they gone one more level of impurity, the commentaries say, the sages say they wouldn't have been able to have been drawn out of Egypt. The answer to that is it really it begs another question. You see, imagine the following. Imagine the following scenario. A man suffers from chronic knee pain. He's been suffering from chronic knee pain for 20 years. And one day he goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives him a medication. He says, listen, you take this medication, and you'll be free of pain, and there are no side effects. The man goes home, he takes the medication, and 24 hours, for the first time in 20 years, he is free of pain. He comes back the next day to the doctor. He says to the doctor, okay, listen, that was great. I've been free of pain for 20 years. I'll take a prescription. The doctor says, I'd love to give you a prescription, but the Food and Drug Administration is not going to okay this pill and market it for another 6 months. Now, I want to ask you a question. The next 6 months, will the knee pain, which he's more or less learned to live with, will that knee pain bother him more or less than it has up until this point? And you can make very strong arguments for the fact that it'll bother him more. Because a person has chronic pain, most cases the person learns to live with it. When he realizes that he's at a point, I don't really have to be going through this pain, and now he's going through this pain needlessly, then he understands it's just bureaucratic red tape that's preventing the relief, then a person feels this is pointless. And the pain then becomes something that weighs more heavily on him because I don't really need to be suffering right now. The Jewish people, the nature of the life is, a person could easily fall into a pattern of complacency. In Israel, for example, the modern state of Israel, you have many, many Israeli Jews who they speak Hebrew and they may attend the Pesach Seder, very, very traditional, but there's no movement in their Judaism. And much of that is due to the fact because they feel that I do have some sort of Jewish identity. Ironically, there are many Israelis who have left Israel. They've gone to places like Germany or Toronto or Los Angeles or Australia or wherever it is. And then outside of Israel, they have actually turned around and come back to their Jewish roots and become Balei Tshuvas. They become religious outside of Israel. Now, why should that be? If in Israel you have all the religion in the world, you have religious Jews running around left, right, and center, and you go to Chutz La'aretz and there are very few Jews around, so why would they make a change in their life and become more religiously committed? And that's the question is exactly the answer. An Israeli who lives in Israel with something of a Jewish identity, there is nothing pushing him to change or to make any attempt to grow. An Israeli Jew who goes to, let's say, West Germany, and he's surrounded by Germans, and he sees, well, they have their identity, and they're very strongly connected to their identity, or goes to Ireland, and they're very strongly connected to their identity. Well, who am I really? And he begins a search. And that search is what causes him to then make a full commitment to Judaism. It's a remarkable phenomenon. The commentaries explain when Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, came to Egypt to redeem the Jewish people, where were they? What was their mindset before that point? Now, if I would ask you, do you believe in the coming of the Mashiach? Do we believe in Mashiach? Oh, sure, we all believe the Mashiach is going to come here one day. Mashiach is going to be here. Did anybody wake up this morning and when you check the news to see what's going on, check to see how many people by a show of hands check to see if Mashiach has arrived? Nope, can't pick up my hand either. Because I didn't. We checked about the war in Ukraine, we checked Israel news, we checked the stock market, checked a lot of things. Didn't check to see if Mashiach is coming. Why is that? Because there are different levels of belief. I believe Mashiach is going to come, but I'm not really living it. I'm so set in the status quo that it's hard for me to actually break out of it and tangibly expect him at any moment. Even though I believe, because as a believing Jew, we all believe that Mashiach is going to come one day. But to tangibly expect it is a completely different ballgame. Now, imagine you're a Jew in Egypt for 210 years, you're getting whipped by Egyptians, you're working in the sun, building buildings that are sinking into quicksand, and you're getting whipped, and people are talking about, oh, one day there's going to be a Redeemer. So yes, we believe there's going to be a Redeemer. Are you really living it? In your Judaism, yeah, I have a name. My name is Feivel, and I speak Yiddish, and I'm wearing my Jewish clothing. But what does my davening look like, and what is my general approach? We're going through the motions. And then one day, Moshe Rabbeinu shows up. And there's a source that says that after Moshe Rabbeinu showed up, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Redeemer is here. And then he disappeared. And there's a source that said he left for 6 months. Could you imagine the attitude of the Jewish people at that point? What do you think the conversation was the next morning? Anybody see him? Hey, did you see him? Is he around? Where's that Redeemer? Could you imagine? The guy says, yeah, I think I saw him. No, that's his brother Aaron. They look very much alike. What happens at that point is the Jew who's really set in his ways, in its very, very flat form of practice, because he doesn't see any real hope. He doesn't see any real way of getting out of his situation. Yes, I'm a Jew. Got a strong Jewish identity. All of a sudden, the Redeemer is here. Now his davening is a different davening. He doesn't speak lashon hara, and his tznius is better. And a person's they do more chesed, and people study more Torah because all of a sudden they're energized. The commentaries say, believe it or not, that karpas, the karpas that we start with the Pesach Seder, the karpas appetizer is to wake us up and make us realize how hungry we are. The karpas is actually there in order to make us realize that we're hungry. And you know what the Redeemer is? The karpas represents Moshe Rabbeinu arriving the first time. And where's the redemption? The redemption is when that food comes out at the Seder. So when we go and you sit down and you have some of those matzah balls in the soup, or you have your roast beef, or whatever not roast, but you're going to have your meat and potatoes, whatever you're going to eat, realize that is symbolic of the redemption of the Jewish people in the future. That's the idea. There's nothing at the Pesach Seder that's just out of the ordinary. Even the food is part of the ritual as a reminder of the redemption. Idea number one. Even more than that, I think that there's a karpas. The karpas appears in other places. You know, the word karpas we've seen in other places. For example, we only had recently in the Megillah of Esther when it describes the opulence of Achashverosh's palace. So the materials described in the tapestries and the various materials that he had in that gorgeous palace at this wild party is chur, karpas, utcheles, and so on and so forth. Now, that means that karpas is a material. Well, you know, nothing in Judaism is ironic. Why would you have karpas as a material? But karpas is also a vegetable, and just make sure you don't get them confused at the Pesach Seder and dip a material in salt water. And what do you call it in the Megillah? Don't think that it's talking about various materials in a potato. It's talking about it is a material, and it also refers to this vegetable we eat at the Pesach Seder. There's another place where karpas appears in the Torah. It's actually one of the commentaries. When Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, gives the cloak of many colors, the ksones pasim, he gives it to Yosef HaTzadik. He gives him call it the multi-technicolor, I think that was the name of the play, Joseph's multi-technicolor, or technicolor multi, I'm not sure what it was. But whatever it is, he gives him this magnificent garment. It's a beautiful garment that the other brothers are jealous. Now, that garment, the material, if you look at the Rashi commentary, Rashi describes the material of this ksones pasim as karpas. Isn't that remarkable? What an ironic connection between Yosef's garment, the Megillah of Esther, and the Pesach Seder. So the solution may very well be that Yaakov Avinu is actually taken to task by the sages. Yaakov Avinu, the Gemara says, a man should never favor one son among the others. La'olam al yeshana adam bein habanim. A person should never favor one son over the others. And the Talmud goes on to say, because of a small amount of material that Yaakov Avinu used to demonstrate favoritism towards Yosef, as a result of that, things spiraled into an exile in Egypt. Oh, now the connection to the Pesach Seder becomes a little more clear. What happens at the Pesach Seder? So one of the features, at the Pesach Seder, one of the main features is the description of the four types of sons that a person may have. And you have the wise son, and you have what's called the Rasha. You have the wicked son. Ironically, if you look in the commentaries, most of the literature at the Pesach Seder is aimed at that cynical son, that Rasha son, who's a cynic about the entire procedure. He's not cynical enough to avoid coming for a good meal, but he sits there at the table, And he starts making all sorts of cynical comments about why are we doing all of this and what is all this work that we got to do as Torah Jews? And we respond to the others about him. That's how it works at the Pesach Seder. But here the idea is right at the beginning of the Seder. Any parent knows, the parent has number of children. We love them all. A parent loves all of his children. But some of them you like a little bit more than others. Some are more likable. You love them all. But the child who's cooperative, who's sharp, who's a good, who does what he should, when he should, and he's attentive, that's a child that you tend to gravitate towards and that you may even like a little bit more. The child who's uncooperative and he gives you a hard time and he's always questioning you, that's a child that you have a little trouble with. At the Pesach Seder, we're communicating to the Father, you have 4 sons. I know which one you'd rather spend your time with. I know which one is easier for you to deal with. The karpas is a reminder, don't favor one over the others. Yaakov Avinu did that, and the Jewish people ended up going to Egypt. And therefore, the Torah is coming along, the ritual at the Seder is to remind us right at the beginning of the Seder, and it's not only the beginning for the Seder, it extends to the entire year. Don't favor la'olam ha'ishana adam ben abanim. Don't favor one over the other. To the contrary, it's often the one who's a bigger challenge, who's the one that we have to shower more attention on. So we're looking forward to this redemption. This karpas is a reminder of the redemption. It's a reminder to a father. And I want to share with you an amazing statement or two or three that the Talmud makes. You see, there's a story. The Talmud tells the story of King Saul, who's the first Jewish king. And King Saul, his father lost some donkeys. Saul at the time was not the king. King Shaul HaMelech, at the time he was only Shaul. Very tall, handsome, very tall man, very handsome. And he goes to ask the prophet. The prophet is Shmuel HaNavi. Shaul goes searching for these donkeys. At a certain point, he gets close to Shmuel HaNavi, Samuel the prophet. He gets close to his city. And he says to his attendant, you know what, the prophet is nearby. Let's go ask the prophet. In those days when you had a prophet was a good thing. You can ask him a lot of things, the prophet, and probably get a tip on the market. We lost a lot when we lost prophecy. So Shaul decides he's going to go speak to Shmuel HaNavi. And he goes over he wants to go to find where Shmuel lives. And he sees a group of young girls. And he says to these girls, where does the prophet live? And the Nach relates that instead of saying over there or giving him an address, the girls give him a speech. It takes them about 3 or 4 sentences in order to communicate where the prophet lives. And the Talmud says, why were they so verbose? Why did it take them so many words in order to communicate where the prophet lives? The Talmud answers, first of all, because Nashim Dabrani Yosein. Women by nature are talkers. They speak more than men do. I actually heard a story once about a guy who says to his wife, hey, Margaret, I just read a study. Women use twice as many words in the course of a lifetime as men do. She says, yeah, Harry, that's because everything I say I got to repeat twice. I said, I'm sorry, what'd you say? So, women have a natural capacity towards speech. Natural tendency towards speech. There's a reason for that. They're meant to use it. It's an energy that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given them. God has given them this energy in order to educate their children and in order to encourage other people and make other people feel good. Be that as it may, it's a fact. And therefore, one opinion in the Talmud is that the reason that it took them so long to say something that could have said in a shorter manner is because women are talkative, number one. The second answer is that they purposely spoke longer in order to be able to spend a little more time looking at Shaul, who is very, very handsome. Interesting. And then there's a third answer. And the third answer is Ein Malchus Nogas Bechaverta Kemolei Nima, which means one reign of a king does not encroach on the reign of another king. The leader of the Jewish people at the time was Shmuel. And Shmuel was not a king officially, but he was the leader. Shaul was anointed by Shmuel, but that was only supposed to take place at, let's say, 1 o'clock, not at 12:59, and not at 12:59 and a half. So these girls spoke longer than necessary in order that Shaul shouldn't reach Shmuel's home for another half a minute or minute. Now, if you stop and think about it, what you have here is three systems. There are three systems in the world. There's a system of nature, there's a system of free choice, and there's a system of what we call hashgacha, God's running of the world. The three systems work in perfect consonance with each other. Nature, by nature, women are talkers. Choice, they choose to extend it in order to be able to look at Shaul for a little bit longer. But ultimately, it's a result of hashgacha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world in such a way that one rain will not encroach on another rain. And what that means is that when we go to Pesach, there's a reminder that the running of the world is completely under God's supervision. We would have still been in Egypt today. We say that at the Seder. Had Hashem not taken us out, we'd still be in Egypt. And the reason we got out is only because we're under the supervision, direct supervision, what we call hashgacha pratis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem. So those young ladies who are activating both nature, choice, and supervision, the running of the world is so precise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows us on Pesach of all the holidays, of all the celebrations of the year, right now, you are under my supervision. You're going to eat the matzah. You're going to eat the matzah which is made by a force from the outside. Chametz, bread, you put in the dough, you put in the flour, you put in the water, and the bread puffs itself up. It participates in its own development. Matzah, flour, water, mix it up into the oven. It does not participate in its development at all. It's a force from the outside. And that, my friends, is why at the end of the Haggadah, we celebrate with this very, very, sounds almost like a child's poem, a child's story about Chad Gadya, and he bought a goat, and the goat was eaten by the cat, and was eaten by the dog, and they beat the dog with the stick. And you have this whole chain that leads to the angel of death, and then ultimately, Asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God comes along, and he overcomes the angel of death. And the commentaries explain that's a reminder to us that we down here on earth, we see the end result. But if you follow the chain all the way up, the chain leads all the way up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's manipulating all the steps down here. Whether it's through our free choice, whether it's through our what we call nature, a little shake up here, and there are ripple effects that go all the way down. That's the idea at the Pesach Seder, that we're under Hashem's supervision, a reminder to us the entire time. Ultimately, though, the entire exile is God's supervision. We're going to have the karpas, and eventually there's going to be the same way that eventually we get to a delicious meal at the Seder. There's going to be a delicious redemption in the near future. Amen.
Hi, this is Peretz Baruch Eichler, a proud alumnus of Ohr Somayach. Now, what you just watched is one of the many programs that Ohr Somayach provides, leaving its impact on hundreds of thousands, with so many more waiting to be reached. Ohr Somayach's Central Campus in Jerusalem has over 300 students presently learning there. And now you can be a vital part of spreading that bounty of knowledge worldwide by logging on to donate.ohr.edu. We can step up to the plate at this pivotal moment of Ohr Somayach's growth and bring the next generation of Jews home.